The first session, we will hear practitioners from different regions and from UNODC, who will share with us why these principles are important. And the first session, which will be all live, we will focus on some aspects of the principles and in particular training. Then finally, we'll have a Q&A session and you can ask questions on the chat and we will try to respond with the 4 or 5 panelists that are live with us. And closing remarks by Norway. So I think the last speaker on the introduction is Juan Mendez, who is the former Special Rapporteur on Torture, the Director of the Anti-Torture Initiative, and who basically is at the origin of the principle, of the idea of the principles. This will be a pre-recorded video.
My name is Juan Mendez, and I'm very pleased to be able to join you today, albeit virtually, for this important event. I am grateful to the event's co-sponsors and distinguished speakers for their collaboration and partnership in amplifying and promoting effective interviewing. As co-chair of the steering committee for the development of the principles on effective interviewing for investigative and information gathering authorities, it is my privilege to provide a brief introduction to the principles and to share with you some of the areas that the principle will elaborate and provide guidance on. Although the prohibition of torture is absolute, as we know, it frequently occurs during the interrogation of suspects and for the purpose of obtaining a confession and solving crime. Around the world, false confessions and unreliable information arising from torture, ill treatment, and coercion during questioning by authorities have led to wrongful convictions, wasted resources, and miscarriages of justice. To address this, in my last thematic report to the United Nations as a Special Rapporteur on Torture in 2016, I called for the development of a set of international standards for interviewing and application of legal and procedural safeguards by state law enforcement, intelligence, administrative, and military officials. The principles we are developing help to answer this call. They integrate established human rights law with a robust and growing scientific research on the question methods that most effectively elicit accurate and reliable information from interviewees, namely rapport-based, non-coercive methods for interviewing. The guidance provided in the principles not only lead to better operational outcomes, but enhances civic trust in institutions as well as respect for dignity and respect for human rights. Broad in their scope and flexible in their application, the principles apply to all interviews by information gathering officials and are suitable for uncomplicated interviews as well as for interviews that are more complex. Of particular note, the principles cover the period from the first contact between state authorities and a potential interviewee to the conclusion of all of their interviews, with the implementation of relevant safeguards continuing through the conclusion of all related legal proceedings. The guidance provided in the principles is intended for policymakers, interviewing professionals, and authorities involved in the conduct of interviews, including law enforcement and intelligence gathering agencies. Our goal is for the principles elaborated in the document to be incorporated into states' domestic laws, regulations, practices, and training. The first principle underscores the robust scientific research, established legal norms, and professional ethics that effective interviewing is founded upon. Principle 2 puts forward the comprehensive process for obtaining accurate and reliable information while respecting human rights before, during, and after the interview. It delineates the relevant legal safeguards that should be implemented throughout the interview and presents practical guidance on the conduct of the interview. Principle 3 imparts that authorities must be mindful of addressing the needs of people in situations of heightened vulnerability based upon risk factors such as age, gender, race, ethnicity, nationality, disability, or religion. The fourth principle emphasizes that effective interviewing is a professional undertaking that requires specific training, which must be continually updated and refined. Principle 5 discusses the importance of transparency and accountability through the accurate record keeping of all interviews and allowing for external oversight, independent monitoring, complaints mechanisms, and redress. The final principle, Principle 6, provides guidance on the successful implementation of the principles, including the systematic review of domestic legal frameworks, the protection of the independence of the judiciary and other criminal justice actors, and the broad dissemination of the principles. Ultimately, these principles will assist authorities around the world to improve the effectiveness and fairness of their investigations. By moving away from a culture of accusatory, coercive, and confession-driven practices, states can draw upon the principles' best practices and help ensure that the presumption of innocence is respected, that only guilty persons are convicted, that wrongly accused persons are freed, and that justice is served for victims and for society at large as well. Thank you very much.
My name is Lilian Stein. I am a professor, a psychology professor in Brazil. I have been teaching and researching in the field of eyewitness psychology, investigative interviewing for the past almost three decades. And I've been also teaching and training the topic of eyewitness memory and investigative interviewing to several groups in the Justice Department in Brazil, police forces, and so forth.
Thank you, Lilian. So we have known each other and worked together for quite a number of years now. So Brazil, investigative interviewing, what's going on?
Well, first of all, I think we have to make sure that we understand that investigative interviewing is an evidence-based, non-coercive technique to gather reliable information. So I would say the beauty of this method, which is now, has about, 3 decades or even more of substantial research towards the effectiveness of this method of interviewing. So investigative interviewing is a method of collecting reliable information in any setting, including criminal cases, counter-terrorist cases, and intelligence cases, any situation. So right now in Brazil, although we've been working on this field for quite some time, including trying to build capacity, our police forces and other people in the justice, other professionals in the justice department, we still have a long way to go. So I was very pleased when in 2008 and 18, the Norwegian Center of Human Rights was able to come to Brazil along with Norwegian police members, and we were able to conduct a full training for police officers and federal police agents here in Brazil. I think this is a collaboration that helps spread the word of science and help train and better equip our security agencies, our police forces to do the best, because right now we have a lack of evidence-based training in interviewing in most of the parts of Brazil. So this is a crucial point.
In 2019, Restart Center, in collaboration with the Norwegian Center for Human Rights, introduced the investigative interviewing approach to 82 Lebanese law enforcement officers and military divisions with the aim of integrating these skills later into their investigative practices, deemed as pioneering initiative in the MENA region. 18 out of the 82 trainees were selected to take part of TOT program based on their classroom performance in the initial module. The capacity building program confirmed that the manner in which law enforcement officials and other investigative bodies shall carry out interviews must reflect fundamental principles such as the absolute prohibition of torture and ill treatment under international law, as well as core human rights standards, including the interviewee's rights to dignity and physical and mental integrity. This training was exhaustively discussed with and highly supported by the Lebanese Minister of Interior. The trainees who attended the workshops recognized the great value that was brought to their learning. They also discussed the challenges they will be facing when shifting toward this new practice. Therefore, in order to encourage the initiated culture change, we supported the program in the provision of relevant textbooks and materials. Some of the key recommendations resulting from this program were building a group of national supervisors on investigative interviewing amongst the TOT participants who will be benefit from technical guidance and follow-up by international experts. Establish a judicial police unit in Lebanon who has both the knowledge and the skills to implement investigative interviewing into its daily operations. Integrate investigative interviewing into the curriculum of the Internal Security Forces, Educational and Training Institute to ensure systematic training and sustainability of the implementation of this approach. Implement a program for the exchange of best practices between Lebanese law enforcement personnel and experienced practitioners of investigative interviewing from the Norwegian and the British police. Develop a comparative study measuring the impact of the implementation of investigative interviewing by the Lebanese law enforcement. These key recommendations form the vision for the continuity of this program in close cooperation with relevant Lebanese authorities and the Norwegian Center for Human Rights. Thank you.
Thank you. It was very interesting to listen to this experience from the national perspective, from Nigeria, Brazil, and Lebanon, about why it's important and why it's important to have training. We would like now to change a little bit perspective and look at the importance of scientific research that is backing the effectiveness of effective interviewing. And I have the pleasure of giving the floor to Becky Milne, who is a professor of forensic psychology at Portsmouth University and who has years of experience and research on investigative interviewing. Becky, from your perspective and your experience and your work as a psychologist, can you let us know a bit more about the research and the scientific evidence that are backing effective interviewing?
Good morning. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes, we can hear you.
Good morning and good afternoon, Kyoto. And thank you for inviting me to speak today. I have been, I've got over 100 publications over the last 25 years in this area, and I've been training police officers in the UK and around the world. And one of the things that I'm continuously asked is, how do we get good investigators and good decision makers? Now, it's as simple as this. Justice is about getting decisions right. decision makers across the criminal justice system have to be informed. Now, if we think about it, decisions are only as good as the information you feed into it. Information is only as good as the questions you ask and the communication that you utilize to gather that questions. So poor questions and communication results in poor information, results in poor decisions. So it is very, very important for us to understand how we get this accurate and reliable information that Lillian Stein just mentioned. So getting accurate and reliable information from someone across the justice system, be they a witness, be they a victim, be they a suspect, is very difficult to do. And it's difficult for a number of reasons. The first main reason is because we need to teach people to talk in a different way. If we use our everyday conversation, we ask very closed and leading questions. That's how we are brought up. So we have to train investigators to speak differently, to speak with lots of open questions. That's the first thing. The second reason getting accurate, reliable and fulsome and relevant information is difficult to do is because human memory is a very, very fragile process. It is so fragile. It's easy to contaminate. It's easy to manipulate. It's easy to change and to alter. By just changing one word in a question, research shows that you can alter the response you get. So it's really important for investigators across the justice system, for decision makers across the justice system, to understand that the questions they ask themselves also can contaminate this human memory. And this human memory is where all that wonderful information is about what has happened, who may be culpable. And so we have to be very careful. So these wonderful principles and the guidance that has been put forward is based on research, based on evidence, and of how best to gather this information. And we know through research on communication and memory that the best way to gather information is actually not asking questions really at all, but asking people to give a free narrative, to control the flow of information. And this is really, really important, especially with those who are vulnerable. Now, we keep hearing this word vulnerability, and there's a really good question about what does vulnerability mean? What is the definition of vulnerability? Now, I train police officers advanced interviewing techniques across the world, and we have a really interesting discussion about vulnerability. And really, vulnerability comes from two areas. You have internal vulnerability, individual factors. You are vulnerable because you are young in years, children. You are old in years, the older adults. You have a learning disability. You have some form of mental disorder. Be they witness, victim, suspect, or source. You also have vulnerability, which are external factors. So you are vulnerable because of the circumstances that you are in. And this is really important. I advised the British police on two of the terror attacks that we had in the UK, the two that we had on London Bridge. And one of the things that we were creating is a triaging system to make sure when we interview our witnesses to these terror attacks, that the interviews were trauma informed. Now, the process that is put within these guidance is the same. It's the same whether we're interviewing a regular adult or someone who is vulnerable. When we have someone who is vulnerable, we just have to be more careful about how we pose our questions and how we interact with them. So even if we've got a regular adult who is traumatized because of witnessing a terror attack, then we have to have skillful, specialist interviewers to manage that within the interview room, to gather the information we require, but also to make sure that we do it in a trauma-informed way. And that is so important. So what I wanted to really say is these wonderful guides and principles is a research base, it is evidence base, and it is mindful that this is the best way to interview witnesses, victims, suspects across the justice system. And it's mindful of those who are vulnerable, whether they're internal vulnerabilities or external vulnerabilities. And that's what's really important. And if we can adapt the process and we adapt it for specific individuals, and it's all about assessment, then this will allow us to give everyone a voice. This will allow us to have investigators and interviewers gathering good quantity and quality information to make informed decisions. They will do it in a way which is in accordance with research, and they will do it in a way so that we have justice. It will give everyone a voice, regardless of who they are. This is a basic human right, is to allow everyone to have a voice. And thank you.
Thank you very much, Becky, for sharing your great experience regarding effective interviewing based on your research and your training. I think your point about the objective of interviewing is to collect information that enables good decision making that in the end allows justice. And also thank you as well for putting the emphasis on the vulnerabilities, which is so important. We can now have videos, but before that, I would like to respond to the question from Anat Horowitz on the chat. And just to clarify that we are now talking on these principles on effective interviewing for investigative authorities that are close to a finalization, but are not completely finalized and adopted yet. So we cannot share it today with the link, but this is a question of days and weeks. So we would be happy to share it as soon as they are adopted. If you share your email, and we can see how to do that afterwards. But we, as Juan Mendes explained in his video, the draft is pretty finalized with the 6 principles that he presented. And there is also one principle on vulnerabilities, just to add that. I would now like to share a video with from statements from 2 UNODC officers who are sharing their views on the importance of effective interviewing. And we will first listen to Tom Parker, who is based in Nigeria, and then we will hear from Nawid Riaz, based in Kazakhstan.
Traditionally in law enforcement investigation, a huge amount of evidence was placed on getting a confession from the suspect, often to the exclusion of other lines of investigation, such as the collection and exploitation of forensic evidence. And we see that in a lot of court cases around the world in the countries we work in. So a huge amount of priority given to getting that confession, and as a result, a lot of pressure is placed on investigators to get that confession from a suspect, and that can often lead to bad practice and abuse. There's a huge amount of research that's been done in countries like the United States and the UK on the role that confession can often play in miscarriages of justice, even in the most serious of offences. And over the past 20, 30 years, in fact, a new practice in investigative interviewing has evolved, what we call active listening, rapport building interviews. In the UK, it's referred to as the peace technique. And this is an approach that is pretty commonplace now in many modern police forces, where the investigator, instead of trying to pressure a suspect into a confession, takes a slightly more passive role, a more reactive role to what the suspect is saying. They listen to the story, they take the information that the suspect provides, and then they test that against the facts. They let the suspect tell their own story, share their own version of events, and then they can take that version of events and test it against the facts. That enables us to build a far sounder case and to determine whether or not the suspect is indeed telling the truth or maybe constructing some form of false narrative. As a result of this approach, there's a number of benefits. The first is you avoid the sort of bias of coming into the interview room with your own ideas and your own ideas of what happened, which can often wrongly drive an interview down a path that's not very productive, and impose the prejudices of the interviewer on the interview process. It also allows you an opportunity to hear the suspect's point of view, to have them share information that perhaps might not initially seem particularly relevant, but might over time turn out to be quite crucial to an investigation. So as a result, you end up with a richer interview experience, ultimately more evidence that you can check against your other evidential streams, and importantly, the rights of the detainee, the suspect, have been observed. The process is more likely to be fair and accurate, and as a result, prosecutors are able to build better cases and get better results in court.
We in UNODC recommend what we call investigative interviewing as the best strategy to employ. And there are very good reasons for that. It may be painstaking, it may take time, however, it brings results, and the right results. And the reason that we are firm advocates of this form of interviewing is based on humane principles, on the foundation of democratic policing, and it enables the interviewer, most important of all, to elicit the right information that will result in investigations being better informed as to further lines of inquiry that may need to pursue, and also or to tie up the information with any evidence that needs to be adduced from the interviews of suspects, witnesses, or victims. This method works, and it ensures that evidence is reliable. It ensures the integrity of evidence, most important of all, and it ensures that the people that you have interviewed, that you develop a level of trust and confidence, because don't forget, in addition to providing possible evidence, as law enforcement officials, it's crucial that you are gathering intelligence, and in whatever interactions that we are involved in the sphere of investigations, we are also always gathering intelligence. And the people that you're interviewing may provide you with absolutely crucial intelligence that might not be useful in your current investigation, but it may prove to be something that you can build upon for any subsequent operations that may need to be mounted. So use this as a basis for developing further intelligence, because the fight against the crime never stops. This can only be done through the proper tried and tested ways, and this model of investigative interviewing is tried and tested. It works. Please give it a try.
Thank you very much, Federico, and congratulations to UNODC and the Norwegian Center for Human Rights for setting up these 3 modules, and it was great to have a look through the video, and I think this seems very, very interactive, with the aim not only to inquire knowledge, but really to influence skills and attitudes of the interviewers. So we are really looking forward to the launching event in May, and we will follow up on that as well. I would now like to give the floor to Gisle Kvanvig from the Norwegian Center for Human Rights, that we have seen now through the e-learning modules, but also from the video from Brazil, Lebanon, and Nigeria. The Norwegian Center is not only involved actively in the drafting of the principles, but also has years of experience in training police officers and law enforcement around the world. Gisle, you have the floor to share with us the importance of training and cooperation to change the practices. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Barbara. And thank you to the organizers for this event as well, and our partners. We've already heard from Solomon Rase, the former Inspector General of the Nigerian Police, as well as Lillian Stein in Brazil and Suzanne Jabour in Lebanon. And I think I just want to say that we started working on this with the Norwegian police about 10 years ago. We started with 2 very small projects in Vietnam and Indonesia. We didn't really know what to expect by taking a model that originated in the UK and was adapted to sort of fit Norwegian circumstances and take it into widely different cultural and linguistic and political contexts. But the response was immediate. And by the end of 2021, we will have cooperation in approximately 20 countries across Africa, Latin America, Asia, and Europe. And we will also have launched a UN police manual. So we're also collaborating with the Department of Peace Operations and their police division. So a manual for police officers under UN command in field missions. We, of course, have the video that Nicholas so eloquently presented, which we're very much looking forward to, and which should also make its way to the public in the next couple of months. And we recently launched cooperation with the UN Office on Counterterrorism. So altogether, over just the past 10 years, we've seen an incredible demand for this. And I think our main experience, if we're looking at our initial expectations, has been that this is extremely welcome. It's not sensitive at all. We expected it to be somewhat sensitive, given that that we're working with police, intelligence, and military. But on the contrary, this has been a sort of easy subject to teach and train on together with our partners in these different countries. And just a final note on the principles themselves, the principles on effective interviewing, is that they will be a very welcome normative anchoring for a practice that is spreading across the globe very, very fast. So thank you to you all for your contributions and your work and your effort. And that's it from me for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gisle. I think the Norwegian Center for Human Rights, through these 10 years of experience, has been really key in contributing to the development of this practice. And thank you for sharing your experience in the field. And I think it's quite interesting, your remark about the fact that because it's practical and it makes sense, it's not a sensitive issue to raise, and it leads to support from the police, law enforcement, and the military. So we have a great cooperation, and we are looking forward to continuing it, especially with all this material that is being developed, including the one you mentioned with UN Police. That is quite interesting. I would now like to give the floor to my colleague, Alexis Komnenos, who is a legal advisor at the APT and has been involved over the past 2 years in the development of the principles. And one of the key features of the principles is the combination between this technique and this method, together with the fundamental legal and procedural safeguards. Alexis, could you highlight how the principle combine these two together and emphasize the importance of safeguards? You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Barbara. And good morning, everyone. It's my great pleasure to be with you today. So as you know, and as you've heard from many of our speakers today, the APT has been involved since 2017, coordinating the development of these principles together with the Norwegian Center for Human Rights and the Anti-Torture Initiative. I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank both UNODC and OHCHR for their valued support and collaboration on the elaboration of these principles. As you have heard, these principles are the unique integration of effective and scientifically grounded interviewing techniques with the implementation of associated legal and procedural safeguards. And the effective implementation of safeguards from the moment of arrest or deprivation of liberty and throughout the interview process is and has been at the center of our work here at the APT. Such safeguards include, for example, the right to receive information about rights, the right to access a lawyer or a doctor during police custody, the right to notify a third person of one's detention. Apologies. And more concretely, ways that APT has been working on the implementation of these safeguards include in Madagascar, a work in close collaboration with the national police to develop new tools and procedures for police custody, such as standard custody registers and a letter of rights. In Brazil, we work with the judiciary and other actors of the criminal justice system to ensure that all persons in police custody are brought before a judge within 24 hours of their arrest. And in Thailand, we work with legal professionals and civil society to provide effective legal aid in the first hours of police custody. And I think it's important here to point out that our work at the APT is also evidence-based. And in 2016, Professors Carver and Handley published an independent academic study entitled, "Does Torture Prevention Work?" And in that book, which was commissioned by the APT, they established that, yes, torture prevention does work, but more importantly for our purposes today, they established that it is the effective implementation of legal and procedural safeguards in the first hours of custody that has the greatest incidence on reducing the risks of torture and other ill treatment. And so our preventive approach is based on risk reduction, and it's based on evidence, and this is why safeguards are key. In addition, as some of our distinguished speakers have said today, creating a non-coercive environment is a crucial element of effective interviewing. It allows the interviewer to develop trust and rapport with the interviewee, and therefore increases the likelihood of eliciting reliable information. In that sense, the effective implementation of safeguards from the first moment of contact with authorities and throughout the interview process does not only contribute to torture prevention, it also contributes to more effective interviewing, a stronger criminal justice process, and the rule of law. And so before we move on to the Q&A, I'd just like to take this opportunity to thank all of the co-organizers of this event, and of course, Switzerland and Norway for their continued support. I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank Gary Hill and his team who have made the organization of these ancillary events possible. I'll be here as well as all of the participants who you've heard live for the Q&A, and I hand it back to Barbara. Thank you very much.